Today, we're looking at a brown ink from Faber Castell Hazel Brown. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. There's timestamps down below so that you can skip around, but if you got the time, I would appreciate you if you check out the entire video. You can follow me over on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen ink reviews, I would remind you to subscribe. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Duke 209 with a Fude nib. I used it to write for a day and then used it to take the notes for this video. In order to standardize some of the writing sample, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now, more papers are tested and they'll show up a bit later. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to make sure I keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade, nice dark brown here. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade, 12 seconds to dry. The medium is slightly lighter than the extra fine with no feather, spread, halo sheen, although there are some shading spots that occur more in the form of a couple dark letters like the letter K, the letter B, the letter X, the letter H, so there are some spots that occur, and when the shade spot happens, it's a bit dark. Now, 17 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us not a lot of color variation, and there was not a lot of color variation, despite those spots that occurred with the medium. Tomoe River. No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is a little bit darker, a little bit lighter than the stub, with no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade, 18 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the stub, so just a little bit darker than the extra fine, with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 26 seconds to dry. The extra fine and medium scrubby both show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it. And Rhodia. Now, Rhodia has no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub, with no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade, 14 seconds to dry. The medium is medium. It is a little bit darker than the extra fine, not quite as dark as the stub. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen. It does offer shade spots in the form of a few darker letters, like the letter X, the letter Q, the H. So there are darker letters that are occurring through the writing, but on a majority it's quite dark. 22 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us some color variation. If you look far left to far right on both, you see some color variation. It's a little more obvious in the medium, but other than that, not really a lot of color variation. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that this brown should be giving us a lot more depth than we're getting from it, from the amount of colors that are mixed to make it. So it starts with this very nice purple. It does leave a line across the bottom, which leads you to believe there's about to become some permanence there. That purple works its way up. We see this kind of brown. We see some magentas come in. We see a dark green. We see a bright yellow. There's so many colors making this brown. While it should be rich, it could be why it looks a little muddy, to be honest. I know it seems odd to call brown muddy. You would think of mud as brown, but muddy's not a good thing when you talk about mixing colors. I think they really goofed this. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And we see a lot of the colors stay behind in a line. That line actually looks quite blue. They don't travel nearly as far up. We still see some of the yellows. We still see some of the magentas. We still see that brownish tone. But I think there's going to be some resistant colors on this.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it.
Looking at the highlighter, I think it does perfectly good in a note-taking situation because it doesn't blow out and become unreadable, so you can feel a little bit safe even with how the capital H gets a little bit blurry and feathery. I don't think it would destroy what you're writing. Now, the tone here, before I move to the water, is where I was talking about it being kind of a muddy brown. Sometimes if you've just mixed too many colors and haven't done a great job while painting, your paints get what people call muddy. And that's what this brown looks to me. A bit muddy brown. Water reactivates and lifts most but not the purple tones in this ink. Now that purple is really staying behind. It's really not moving, which makes me feel like water's not going to be enough to get this out of your pen. Pen Flush reactivates and lifts everything except a bright purple. That bright purple is very much there. I don't think Pen Flush is going to be what really helps here. Now, 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the page. You see it on the left side where you see the white of the paper coming through. Should you have to use the 1/3 bleach solution, I'm going to encourage you to immediately flush your pen with water to make sure you do not rust your metal bits.
For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Now I'm going to link a video where I show how I test it and how I calculate the data.
Graf von Faber Castell's Hazelnut Brown has a viscosity of 1.71, making this a wetter ink.
To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples. Now for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds.
Graf von Faber Castell's Hazelnut Brown has an average dry time of 18 seconds, so despite it being a much wetter ink, its dry time is very much normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Graf von Faber Castell's Hazelnut Brown, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now, I wanted to go with a gray again. I feel like I'm a little bit of a gray kick at the moment. I went with Diamine Grey because it's named Gray.
The second writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia, white lines paper, and Strathmore writing.
I like using the yellow paper to see how it might affect this, the inks when I compare it to what's happened with on the white paper. Now, I was hoping it would help bring out a little bit of something and maybe not make it so muddy. The truth is, this is a very opaque ink. Not a lot of stuff is getting through it. It covers up very well what it's on top of, which means that same muddy, ugly brown is what we have right here. It's just not getting through. This is white lines paper, which is not particularly friendly to most fountain pen inks, but we've been finding a bunch. But here, we do see spots of bleed that occur on the stub, on the extra fine, but not so much on the medium. Now, these bleed spots are not touching the page underneath. They are not causing you to not be able to use the back of the page. They're just little spots. So not a big deal, but something to be aware of. The 1.1 stub has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 3 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, not quite as dark as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 5 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it. And the last paper is Strathmore writing paper. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 4 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine, right about the same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 6 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both, show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, we didn't get it, and that's all that I have for the writing sample. So what do I think of Faber Castell's Hazel Brown? This is a nice dark brown. Now if it's too wet, you can lose some of the character of the brown, but it is dark enough that it can pass in a professional environment, most likely because it is a very dark brown. So what nib and pen gives the best writing experience with this ink? I find that a fine, wet pen puts enough ink down, keeps it dark enough to help it pass in that professional environment. I'm going to remind you that I'm here every day with a new ink review. Thanks for watching.